welcome to In the Spotlight. I'm Abigail Pogrebin. Jonathan D. Sarna is the Joseph H. and Belle R. Braun Professor of American Jewish History at Brandeis University. He is also the chief historian of the Weizmann National Museum of American Jewish History. He is the only American Jewish historian who's been elected to the Academy of Arts and Sciences. And he's the author or editor of more than 30 books on American Jewish history and life, including the title American Judaism, A History. His most recent book we're going to talk about today is called Lincoln and the Jews, A History. Welcome to the broadcast, Professor Sarna. I hope you'll let me call you Jonathan.
Delighted. A pleasure to be with you. Abby, yes.
Thank you. Lincoln and the Jews don't necessarily go together intuitively. Everyone I've talked to about this book who sadly didn't know about the first edition said, wait, what did you say? Lincoln and the Jews? So, for those who are neophytes, help us know how this is a marriage of any kind.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons I did the book. You couldn't have really done a book on an earlier president of the United States in the same way. First of all, by Lincoln's day, there were 150,000 Jews on the eve of the Civil War. And that's important. When he was born, there were only 3,000 Jews in America. So his life coincides.
Wait, did you say those numbers again so people heard
Sure.
the difference?
He's born in 1809. There may be 3,000 Jews. Most of them live in a few East Coast communities. By the time the Civil War starts, there are 150,000 Jews spread all the way across the continent. They've even reached, of course, California. And most of those are Central European Jews, and that's important. And there are Jews in Illinois whom Lincoln gets to know. And one of them is an important lawyer named Abraham Jonas, whom he gets to know well and who plays a significant role. Of course, everything we know teaches us if you have a good friend who's a Jew, it changes your whole view of Jews.
And just because you mentioned him, I know we want to get more of the larger picture, but can we just pause on Jonas for a minute? Because it's just such an interesting portrait you draw.
Jonas is a fascinating figure. Some people may know that there's a man named Joseph Jonas, who's the first Jew in Cincinnati. Abraham is his brother, and they were there together. They were British Jews. And they started out really quite religious and married two daughters of the most significant religious figure of the day, whose name was Gershom Seixas, the minister of Shearith Israel, the Spanish and Portuguese synagogue. Unfortunately, living in Cincinnati was hard, and both of those poor women died young, and perhaps of a broken heart and maybe a bit of a broken faith. Abraham Jonas then moves on and spends time in Kentucky, where he gets to know Henry Clay, who seems to have known everybody in Kentucky at that time. But again, these guys were all influenced by Henry Clay, and the same is true of Abraham Lincoln, of course. And then, like Lincoln, he moves on to Illinois. A part of the reason for that is that if you bought land in Illinois, you knew it was yours. If you bought it in Kentucky, maybe it had been promised to some Revolutionary War soldier who would come and contest your land. So they move on to Illinois, and both of them are itinerant lawyers, and clearly they spent time together, and both of them end up in the Republican Party, which is a new party. And it's clear that Abraham Jonas becomes something of an advisor to Abraham Lincoln. One of the most remarkable moments, I would say, as an investigator for me, was reading some of these letters. And then all of a sudden, you see this idea, oh, the Republican Party should recruit Jews into the party. You don't find that in America. Nobody thinks of it. You don't find it in Europe for different reasons, but um, that's a sign. The Republican Party is going to try and make a kind of coalition of the disaffected, we would say today, um, and bring in, of course, people who disagreed with the Supreme Court's stance on slavery, but also a bunch of other people. And Jews, by which I think Jonas principally had in mind German Jews who had fought as liberals in the 1848 revolution. They thought Jews would be the big beneficiaries. And when those revolutions fail, they leave and they come in significant numbers to America, and they do significantly. Those support Lincoln, Pilgrims of 48, and
So can
they're
you
the real
just for
liberals.
those who don't remember the 48 revolutions, can you just give us like two sentences on what those were about?
So, yeah, I'm showing my age. I remember them, of course.
As if you lived them, Jonathan.
Right. My students think
Those
I,
1848 revolutions.
yeah, those were the days. Look, you had young liberal folks who uh, really thought that they could rebel against these little petty kings in Germany. Germany is not yet reunited. They're going to bring everybody together on liberal principles and create a new order. Of course, they're influenced by the French Revolution, and these ideas have spread. And from the Jewish point of view, they thought they would also win what Jews call emancipation. In other words, equal rights for Jews. Um, the revolutions fail. And in fact, Germany is not totally united till Bismarck comes along and does it in 1871, I think. Of course, many of these revolutionaries knew that they could now be jailed or worse. So, of course, they have good reason to come to America, and they're very famous names there. Brandeis and the whole crowd, Goldmark, those folks had all been involved, and they will come and make a fresh start. And those liberal folks do tend to support the new Republican Party.
Okay.
But it's important to point out that, of course, there's a whole other group of Jews who have gone into the clothing business. And if you lived in New York and your business was making clothes for slaves, in other words, you shipped the cotton came to New York, they made these terrible clothes for slaves and shipped them back because the South, unfortunately, didn't make anything and the whole thing was horrible. But if that's what you were,
then you wanted to keep slavery going.
then exactly, you may think it's bad, but can't we make some kind of compromise? And that's really the reason why the rabbi of B'nai Jeshurun, who turns out later to support the Union, but before then, he makes this infamous speech in which he says, look, slavery's in the Ten Commandments. It's in the Bible. Can't we just treat our slaves better and make peace?
It's
Uh,
incredible, by the way, to think of B'nai Jeshurun today.
yeah, I spoke at their 200th anniversary recently, and
And
so
brought up the tough
uh,
history.
well, but I have to say that in other respects, he was a model of a new kind of rabbi, a great English speaking, learned rabbi, a rabbi doctor, and he did support Lincoln later. But you're remembered sometimes for the worst thing you ever say. And
Right.
that's certainly what happened to Rafal. Most people know nothing about him except that infamous speech, which was infamous from the day he gave it.
Wow.
He was attacked um, across the North. There are even poems against him, and even his friend, the religious Isaac Leeser, says, sometimes it would have been better not to open your mouth, essentially, on these kinds of divisive issues. But
So
yeah,
the,
we're back to
yeah,
Jonas. Jonas is a lawyer. He's friendly with Lincoln, but Lincoln has an astonishing number of other Jewish friends, acquaintances. We have
foot
this,
doctors.
right. I will get to the foot doctor, everybody's favorite. Um, but there is an amazing chart, and you couldn't have made that chart for any previous president, and honestly, not for some of the successors. Certainly, Andrew Johnson was an anti-Semite, but the chart are all these Jews whom Lincoln, knew, and
That shaped and shifted his approach. And before we go into some of the other characters, I just want to talk about the mechanics of the book because you first came out with this edition that was essentially a coffee table book, magnificent, but you teamed up with essentially like an archivist collector, I will say. Am I right?
right, right,
And he came to you with all of these incredible I mean, what do we call it? Their photographs, their papers, their
right.
letters, and kind of was like, what do you think? And you said, let's turn this into a narrative. I'll write, essentially turn this into a story, which is amazing. What was the decision to do the edition that exists now with just to make
I
it more portable, essentially?
Well, people complained that they couldn't take that big book on a plane to read it, and they couldn't teach it, and that the story of Lincoln and the Jews is not just a big coffee table, but it deserved a book, and much to his credit, because I think for Benjamin Chappelle, it's his amazing collection. It's the largest, I think, collection of its type,
Wow.
but there are fewer but pictures and documents here. It's mostly text. But I will say we were able to add new material. Ben still collects, and there are some new things. Some of them round out things that we didn't know before. The one I like best is the earliest political broadside of the Jewish community that's ever been found. In 1864, there is a broadside, and, Jews should vote for Lincoln. We imagine, and all the
Mm.
books say, oh, Jews didn't engage in politics back then. That's 20th century. But it turns out that almost as soon as you have significant numbers of Jewish voters, there are folks who want to persuade Jews to vote for the person they think is best for the Jews. And this is the earliest broadside that we have. And in some ways, it will force a rewriting of the political history of American Jews. So that's in here as well. So there's new material, and also a new preface. And honestly, it's kind of timely because without entering into contemporary politics, let's say the Republican Party is a little different today than it was in Lincoln's day. And
Right. It's interesting looking at the contrast. Jonathan,
exactly.
just because we only have 12 minutes left and I have so much to cover, let's go to the am I pronouncing it right? Chiropodist, the foot doctor.
Yeah, right. At some point in the 20th century, the chiropodists voted to change the word to podiatrist. So,
That was
but
a good move.
yeah, I think so too. In the 19th century, was a chiropodist, and not just any old chiropodist. I mean, he was probably the most important chiropodist of his day. And one of the fascinating things I learned, I certainly didn't know, it's not in any book, this was sort of a Jewish monopoly. Um, a lot of Jews couldn't get into other parts of the medical profession, so they move in this direction. Uh, how exactly Zachary learns it is a bit of a mystery, although he always called himself Dr. Zachary. There's no evidence that he had obtained uh, the degree, but he clearly was good. In fact, um, uh, he used to collect kind of notes from people whom
We're
he
thinking,
treated. Right, and there is a huge collection of these from very famous people, Calhoun and Clay, all the guys we read about, and Abraham Lincoln, who had bad feet famously, and who Zachary treats, and it's actually a very interesting. Lincoln is a lawyer and is very careful what he writes. We'll see how it turns out and so on. But
but
they,
he treats the army also.
well, he also, now they don't, he treats a lot of soldiers. And of course, if you're in the Civil War, it's not like they, used half tracks in those days. There was a lot of walking. And Zachary thought there should be a corps and he should lead it. That doesn't happen.
Okay.
First, he has enemies. Second, not everybody agrees on the importance of treating feet. It turns out there was a kind of big debate on it, and the whole treatment of feet. You didn't have right shoes and left shoes, and understanding of how important it is
Wow.
for a long time. I mean, it was fascinating. Who knew?
So their
Anyway,
closeness, though, it's almost like you're hinting at a special closeness. I mean,
yeah, I do. I mean, Zachary clearly is very close to Lincoln now. There is, of course, a book that claims that Lincoln was gay. Anyone who reads this book carefully will see Zachary certainly was gay. And he did have children, but his wife is far away, and he has a male servant who serves him in many meanings, and then they have a lover's squabble, all of which is preserved and talked about. I don't think that's what makes Zachary important,
right.
but it is
It's a
clear.
data point with Lincoln.
Right, it is clear. And what is important is that in addition to all of his chiropody, he's helping Jews. And because he knew Lincoln, if somebody got into trouble, was arrested, they were in the wrong place at the wrong time, they knew we'll go to Zachary
And
and
he'll bail us out. He'll get
he'll
us
be
out
the
of it.
fixer, right? And several of those are known. Some of them probably not known because they sure make a big party for Zachary. And I got afterwards, and that suggests there were lots of people who thought they owed him. And Zachary promises to organize in 1864 the Jewish community to vote for Abraham
Wow.
Lincoln. And
So
he goes in politics.
it's amazing. And 2 years before that, December 1862, Ulysses Grant issues his notorious General Order number 11, which expels Jews as a class. And Lincoln has a pretty decisive move here. Can you just, in a condensed form, I know, but give us.
Right, I can condense it because I wrote a whole book called When General Grant Expelled the Jews. But here it's very simple. Um, uh, he doesn't know anything about it, Lincoln, because the telegraph lines have been cut. But a Jew who is being expelled from Paducah, Kentucky, has the good sense, first, to immediately go to Washington to complain to the man at the top, and second, he brings all the documents. And so on a Friday night, Lincoln worked all the time. He comes with a congressman.
And you could walk into the White House at that point.
Yeah, you could. He comes to Lincoln, and Lincoln sees this order. There is some question. Maybe it's not genuine, but Lincoln immediately orders that such an order be reversed. And because there's a question, the telegram to U.S. Grant reads, "If such an order has been issued, it is hereby reversed."
Wow.
And then we have, I mean, the good thing is Civil War, we've got all of this paper. And then Grant immediately listens. And, what's very nice is what Lincoln then tells Jewish leaders. Of course, the minute they hear the order, this is the worst thing that's ever happened to Jews, the whole history of the United States in many ways. And it's still the most notorious official order against Jews in American history. So anyone rushes to Washington, and on the way, they see in a paper that Lincoln has reversed the order. So they get together. We're already there. We'll thank Lincoln. And they meet with Lincoln. And Lincoln says to them something to the effect that he doesn't like to hear a whole class of people arraigned on account of a few sinners. I've always wished that Mr. Spielberg had included that
Such a
great
moment.
line in his movie, because that's when you see the real Lincoln. I mean, it would have been easy to say, you know what, when the war ends, we'll worry about it.
Right.
U.S. Grant is my best general. I'm not meddling with him. But that's not what Lincoln does.
Wow. And you say also that his private thoughts reflected his public ones, that he really wasn't. He was not an anti-Semite in private when many were. Just because we're running out of time, I want to get to his assassination because it just was so moving to me that there was this outpouring of grief from the Jewish community. And they even said Kaddish for him.
Yeah, which they claim, whether it's true or not, was the first time it's said for a non-Jew. And remember that the news hits on a Saturday morning. So, he's murdered. I mean, he's shot Friday night. He dies Saturday morning. There's telegraph by then. And the news hits. It's a little bit like October 7th. People hear it in synagogue. And we have many accounts. And the very first sermons, kind of right off the top of our head sermons, are delivered by rabbis. And rabbis play a significant role in the public mourning, which again is new and a sign that there are 150,000 Jews, and they have a place. So this is not just the story of Lincoln and the Jews; it's a story of a changing America, which is really why the story, I think, deserves to be better known than it is.
Thank you so much, Professor Sarna, for this wonderful discussion. The book, again, is called Lincoln and the Jews, A History. It is wonderful to be with you. I'm Abigail Pogrebin for In the Spotlight. I'll see you next time.